They dressed her in borrowed silk because appearances mattered at the harvest ball even for an Omega no one expected to notice. Alara smoothed the wrinkled skirt with hands that smelled faintly of comfrey lavender and the smoke of old fires. Her palms were rough, dotted with scars from years of pestle-work candle burns and clumsy stitches. The borrowed gown shimmered like watered moonlight beneath the chandeliers, but it hung wrong on her hunger-thinned frame and bit at her shoulders, where the seams had been clumsily let out by a hurried needle. She was 20 and had long since learned not to mind such small pains, yet she could not quiet the sense that she had been dressed like a lamb for slaughter. The great hall was a cage of light and music. Violins, soared, boots thudded in rhythm and laughter rang too loudly, too sharp. Wolves in brocade and leather glided through the crowd with predatory ease, their smiles all gleaming teeth. Above them, banners rippled in the heat of the braziers, the winter stag on black crest of the high march. The air smelled of cinnamon wine, roasted meats, and hot iron from the guard blades polished to a mirror. Alara kept to the edge of the dancers in the narrow seam between splendor and labor where servants moved with trays, and no one's gaze lingered long. It was safer there where she could pretend she had come to refill goblets, rather than to be rejected outright by eligible males who found her bloodline inadequate. Omegas, after all, were supposed to be fragile ornaments bound by scent and bond to a stronger will. She had never been fragile, but she had learned to hide that truth as carefully as a knife beneath skirts. "Stand straighter," hissed the steward as he drifted by the scent of cloves clinging to his breath. "If his lordship's guest refuses to meet a gaze, they will say we rear cowards." Alara lifted her chin, though the movement sent a flush burning up her throat. She was not his ward, not truly. She had been raised in the healer's cloister, tolerated more than cherished, taught that her skill with herbs was useful, but her station was not. Tonight she stood here only because the court demanded every eligible female be displayed like hounds brought out for inspection. The music swelled. A circle of alphas whirled their partners across the marble floor silks, flashing in arcs of crimson and gold. Their scents filled the air, iron, smoke, leather musk, clashing, overwhelming. Alara swallowed against the dizziness of it. She pressed her back to the column, wishing for the quiet shadow of the apothecary where dried bundles of sage and valerian lined the rafters, and no one cared how low she bowed her head. Snatches of conversation drifted toward her. "Did you see how she stumbled pathetic? The blackthorn heir will never waste his claim on an Omega so thin. She'll be given away to some border captain if anyone takes her at all." Alara curled her fingers into the folds of the gown, willing herself not to show hurt. Words had teeth sharper than any wolf's, but she had endured them all her life. She told herself she did not care that she had expected to be invisible. And yet, a small ember of defiance glowed low in her chest. The doors at the far end of the hall thundered open. A hush rippled outward, swallowing laughter, stilling the music. Even the banners seemed to fall quiet. He had come. Lord Kalen Alpha, of the High March Conqueror of the Western clans. The man whose name was spoken like both prayer and curse. He entered not in jeweled finery, but in black leather, his cloak edged with silver fur. His presence filled the chamber heavy and unyielding, like storm clouds pressing low against the earth. His hair was dark, his eyes a pale, cold grey that swept across the assembled guests as if he measured them for their worth. Alara's breath caught, and for a moment she thought he would pass her by as all the others had. Yet his gaze snagged briefly, startlingly on hers, a flicker like the weight of a hand upon her shoulder. Her stomach knotted, She dropped her eyes at once, heat flooding her skin. Surely she imagined it. Surely he could not have noticed her. But the silence in the hall deepened. His steps echoed as he descended the stair, deliberate, unhurried, until he stood upon the marble floor among the dancers, who now bowed and curtsied like reeds in a storm wind. Still she felt the prickle of his attention. "Elara," someone hissed near her ear, though she could not tell who. "Do not draw notice," as if she had any choice. The Alpha Lord turned slow as a predator and extended his hand not to the jeweled daughters of noble houses, not to the scarlet-gowned beauties who leaned forward like blossoms craving sunlight. His hand extended toward the shadows at the edge of the hall, toward her. A murmur broke out. Disbelief, outrage, hunger. The steward behind her gasped aloud. Alara's heart pounded in her ribs so hard it felt as though the gown itself might tear. The Alpha's voice was low, resonant, carrying with ease across the stunned chamber. "You," he said, and the word left no doubt at all. For a heartbeat no one dared breathe. The grand hall seemed carved from silence, its chandeliers frozen in glittering starlight. Then, as if compelled by some invisible command, the gathered wolves shifted back, creating a corridor through which Elara was forced to walk. Her steps sounded far too loud on the marble, each one an accusation. She did not remember willing her body forward, only the tug of destiny or doom drawing her toward the center of the storm. Lord Kaelin's hand remained extended, unadorned, ungloved, scarred, where an old blade had split the flesh between thumb and forefinger. It was not the hand of a courtly suitor. It was the hand of a warrior who had killed who could kill again without hesitation. When Elara placed her trembling fingers in his, a shiver lanced through her bones. Heat flooded her cheeks, not entirely fear, not entirely awe. Something older stirred some instinct woven deep into blood and marrow wolf, recognizing wolf no matter the distance between their stations. Gasps rippled around them. The music faltered, then fell silent. Elara knew what they saw, an Omega nobody plucked from the shadows daring to touch the Alpha Lord. She could feel their stares like knives pressed to her spine. She braced for laughter, for mockery, for someone to drag her away. But Kaelin's grip was firm, immovable, and when he pulled her gently toward him, no one dared intervene. "You will dance," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question. Her mouth went dry. She had been taught the steps as a child, but practice in empty corridors was not the same as being led onto the polished floor beneath 100 unkind eyes. The circle widened, nobles pressing back to make room, some whispering, some glaring. Elara's body resisted stiff as wood until Kaelin's hand pressed lightly at the small of her back, guiding, anchoring, commanding. The violins resumed hesitant at first, then swelling with renewed vigor. She moved because she must, because the Alpha's strength steered her through the turns, because to stumble would be to fall not only in shame, but in peril. His presence consumed her. The heat of him bled through cloth, his scent a heady mixture of smoke, steel, and winter frost. It drowned out the perfume and musk of every other wolf in the chamber. "You hide well," he murmured, his lips close to her ear, though his gaze never left the room. "But I see you." Elara's heart tripped. She dared not answer. To speak would be to expose trembling, and weakness was already a noose about her neck. Still something in her chest flared at his words, a fragile spark that both terrified and thrilled her. Around them the courtiers seethed. She caught fragments outrageous and insult Omegas should know their place. The venom in their voices slashed sharper than any blade. Yet Kaelin moved as though oblivious, as though their rage and disdain were less than the buzzing of flies. "You fear them more than you fear me," he said softly, almost amused. She lifted her eyes to his, startled. His were pale, storm grey, unreadable. "Should I not?" she whispered before she could stop herself. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Perhaps. The music spun them faster, her skirts whispering against his boots. The world blurred at the edges until there was only his steady rhythm and the press of his hand keeping her upright. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the dance ended. Applause followed, polite but strained, brittle as cracked glass. Kaelin did not release her hand. Instead, he turned with her still at his side, addressing the hall. "You will treat her with the respect owed to one under my protection." His tone was even, but it rolled across the chamber like thunder. "She is mine to claim." The declaration fell heavy as stone. A sharp inhale swept through the crowd. Some looked horrified, others calculating, a few openly enraged. The steward who had scolded her earlier swayed as though struck. Alara's knees nearly buckled. The words had not been a request, nor a courtly courtesy. They were law, set down in the presence of every noble eye. She could no longer vanish back into shadows, no longer pretend to be invisible. By his command, she had been marked out, set apart, bound to his fate. The Alpha Lord guided her from the floor as the musicians scrambled into another tune, though few returned to dancing. Conversation swelled in furious undertones, like the growl of a pack on the edge of violence. Whispers trailed her steps. "Which upstart Omega? This will end in blood." She dared not look at him yet. She felt the weight of Kaelin's attention settle over her like a cloak, heavy and unyielding. Protection or possession, she could not tell. When at last they reached the dais, he released her hand only long enough to signal for wine. The goblet was placed in her grasp. His own fingers covered hers, steadying. "Drink," he ordered quietly. Alara obeyed, though her throat ached with every swallow. The wine tasted of dark berries and smoke. Then he leaned close, his breath brushing the curve of her jaw. "There will be those who test you. Do not falter. Tonight you are mine." Her pulse thundered. Around them the court seethed with restrained fury. Somewhere deep inside, the ember of defiance that had smoldered for years flared brighter. She was terrified, yes, but she was also seen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night air outside the hall was colder than Alara expected. She drew in a sharp breath as the double doors boomed shut behind them, cutting off the press of music and whispers. The silence of the courtyard spread wide, broken only by the hiss of torches and the restless stamp of tethered horses. Kaelin did not release her. His hand remained at her elbow, steady as iron. She felt both guided and bound, a prisoner wrapped in the illusion of grace. At last, when they reached the shadow of the outer gate, he stopped. Only then did his eyes turn fully to her. "You understand what I have done," he said. It was not phrased as a question. Alara swallowed throat raw from wine and nerves. You made me a target." For the first time he seemed faintly amused, though the curve of his mouth carried no warmth. "I gave you my shield. That comes with enemies, yes, but also power." She wanted to laugh at the word. Power. She was a healer's daughter, an omega cast aside, clothed in borrowed silk. Yet the memory of the hall still pressed on her, the stares, the shock, the fear disguised as outrage. Perhaps there was truth in his words. Power did not always mean strength of arm. Sometimes it was the tremor you left in the hearts of others. "Why me?" she whispered. His gaze did not waver. "Because no one saw you, and because I did." The bluntness of it struck harder than any flowery compliment could have. Her chest tightened, torn between gratitude and terror. She had dreamed of being noticed once. Now the dream had teeth. Before she could shape a reply, a voice slithered from the shadows. "Bold, my lord, very bold. But are you certain this little stray is worth the pack's fury?" A man stepped forward, his cloak lined with wolf pelts, his smile sharp as glass. Lord Vanar Kaelin's cousin, known for his ambition and his cruelty. Alara stiffened. She had seen him before at markets, surrounded by guards, speaking with the oily charm of a snake coiled in sunlight. Kaelin did not flinch. "If you have counsel to give Vanar, do it in daylight, not in ambush." "Ambush?" The cousin chuckled. "I only came to congratulate you. The hall hums with scandal already. You've set every tongue wagging, every noble trembling. And all for this one." His eyes slid over Alara like a blade across glass. "I wonder what makes her worth the risk." Alara tried to step back, but Kaelin's hand tightened on her arm, anchoring her in place. "Enough!" His tone dropped to the level of growl, low and dangerous. "If you think to challenge me, do it openly. Otherwise, keep your forked tongue behind your teeth." Vaynar's smile never faltered. "As you command, cousin. But remember, wolves tear at weakness. Even a hint of it, and the pack will devour. Be certain she is not your undoing." With that, he bowed mockingly and retreated into the shadows. Alara's lungs ached with the breath she had held. Kaelin released her, slowly studying her, as though weighing her spine. "He will strike again," he said. "He always does." "Then why provoke him?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Kaelin's eyes flashed, but not with anger. "Because wolves must learn where their alpha stands. Tonight, they have learned." He turned and began walking, leaving her to gather her courage and follow. The fortress loomed ahead, its towers jagged against the night sky. She had never stepped beyond the outer court, yet now the gates yawned wide, swallowing her into a world of stone and iron that smelled of ash and secrets. The halls were lined with guards. Their eyes followed her curious, suspicious. Some sneered openly, others only tightened their grips on spear shafts. Alara walked with her chin high, though her heart battered at her ribs like a trapped bird. At last they reached a chamber lit by firelight. The walls were hung with banners, the floor furred with pelts. Kaelin gestured and she entered. The doors closed behind with a heavy finality. "You will stay here tonight," he said. "This room is yours." She looked around in disbelief. The chamber was larger than her family's cottage, its bed heaped with blankets, its hearth alive with flame. She felt unmoored, as if the ground had tilted. "I don't belong here," she murmured. His answer was swift. "You do now." Then he left the door locking behind him, with a sound that echoed in her bones. Alone, Alara sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands shook. She thought of her mother's cottage of herbs drying from the rafters of nights spent grinding roots and whispering prayers. She thought of the ball of Kaelin's hand, of the cousin's venomous smile. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind howled through stone towers. Inside, silence wrapped her throat. She was caught in the jaws of something vast, something that might yet crush her or teach her to bare her own teeth. And in that silence, she whispered to herself, as if the walls might listen, "I will not be devoured." They worked quickly. Ilara cleaned the wound, her fingers sure, even as her heart galloped. She spoke softly to distract the girl, naming herbs she remembered from her mother's cottage, comfrey, yarrow, marigold, though none grew here in this stone fortress. Lyda's breathing steadied the panic draining from her face as the bleeding slowed under Ilara's hand. With needle and thread, Ilara closed the torn flesh in careful stitches. When it was done, she bound the hand with linen and pressed the girl's wrist lightly. "There," she said. "Keep it clean, change the wrapping daily. You will hold a reign again within the month." Lyda's eyes brimmed with relief. "Thank you." She dipped her head, but before she could say more, Branna's voice cut through the steam. "Back to your post, girl." Lyda obeyed, vanishing into the corridor. Branna studied Ilara for a long, unreadable moment. "You've skill," she said at last. "Useful skill. Keep that hidden from most, but not from me." Ilara hesitated. Why hidden? Because some here would call healing weakness. Others would call it witchcraft. Both are dangerous. Branna turned away, but her words lingered. Still, there are those who will remember kindness. By noon, word had spread. Servants watched her differently, whispers curling like smoke whenever she passed. Some with awe, some with suspicion. In a fortress where strength was measured by scars, the act of mending was a strange kind of rebellion. That evening, Kaelin summoned her. She was led through long corridors to a high chamber where torches gutted against the stone and maps lay scattered across a heavy table. He stood bent over them, one hand braced the other, holding a goblet. When he looked up, his gaze cut through the distance as though she were the only soul in the room. "You stitched a stable girl's hand." His voice carried no anger, but it carried weight. Ilara folded her hands before her. She would have lost it without care. Silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, unexpectedly, Kaelin laughed, not cruel, not mocking, but low, like distant thunder. "Already, you make my halls talk." Vaynar seethes. "The servants whisper your name." "And I—" He broke off, circling the table until he stood close enough that she felt the heat of him. "I wonder if the gods sent me a healer when I thought I needed only a mate." Her breath caught. "I am not." "You are what I say you are," he interrupted, though not unkindly. "But the choice remains. You can hide and survive, or you can bear your gift and change this place." His eyes glinted unreadable. "Both paths are dangerous." Ilara held his gaze despite the tremor in her bones. "If I must be remembered, I would rather it be for saving than for silence." The words surprised even herself. But Kaelin nodded once sharply, as if she had passed a test she had not known she was taking. Before she could draw another breath, the chamber door slammed open. Vaynar strode in without ceremony, his cloak swirling, his mouth curled in a smile too sharp to be friendly. "Cousin," he drawled, "forgive the intrusion, but I hear your chosen stray plays the healer in your kitchens. Bold indeed to flaunt such softness where steel should reign." His eyes found Ilara raking her with open disdain. Careful, or your pet may teach the pack that pain is no longer virtue. Kaelin's jaw tightened. Leave. Vaynar's smile widened. Oh, I will. But mark me, every act of mercy is a crack in your walls, and wolves are eager to slip through cracks. He left as swiftly as he came, his laughter echoing down the corridor like a blade dragged on stone. Kaelin's hand closed around Alara's wrist, firm but not cruel. Do not fear him. Fear makes him stronger. But do not underestimate him either. He will strike, and he will choose his moment well. Her pulse hammered beneath his grip. She met his eyes and found no comfort there, only challenge. The path before her stretched dark and treacherous, but she felt the shape of her decision hardening in her chest. She would not cower. Not before Vaynar. Not before the whispers, not even before the Alpha himself. And Kaelin, studying her, seemed to recognize it. His mouth curved not in humor, but in something sharper respect. The fortress stirred before dawn, a restless beast of stone and iron. From her narrow chamber, Alara heard the clash of steel in the yard below, the guttural shouts of men drilling the crack of whips meant to harden backs rather than punish crime. She rose washed in a basin, where the water turned her skin raw and braided her hair with trembling fingers. The cold bit deep, but it steadied her. Branna came without knocking. You'll follow me today. The pack must see you not as a ghost in the hallways, but as flesh and blood. Kaelin commands it. Alara's heart jolted. To what end? To test you. The older woman's eyes were flint. They will want to break you or shame you. Hold steady, girl. Wolves respect little else. They crossed the corridors together, climbing until the walls opened into the great training yard. It was a brutal theater, sand churned to mud dummies hacked to splinters, the stench of sweat and iron thick in the air. Warriors circled like hawks, their eyes narrowing as Alara entered. Vaynar waited at the far side, draped in wolf fur, despite the rising sun, his smile smooth as poisoned honey. So this is the little Omega who dares sit at our table. Cousin, you indulge curiosities too freely. Kaelin stood nearby, broad-shouldered and still as a storm about to break. He said nothing. His silence was command enough. The pack shifted uneasily, waiting. Vaynar gestured to the sand. If she wishes to wear our crest, let her prove herself. No healer's tricks, no soft words. Let her stand against strength. A ripple of approval rolled through the crowd. 2 young warriors stepped forward, eager. Their arms gleamed with sweat, their mouths curved in cruel grins. Branna's hand brushed Alara's sleeve, a whisper of warning, but Alara stepped down into the pit. Her stomach knotted, yet her feet were steady. The first warrior lunged. She twisted aside, not fast enough to escape the sting of his blow across her shoulder. Pain lit through her sharp as lightning. The crowd jeered. The second came at her low, a sweep meant to drop her flat. She stumbled, caught herself, grit grinding into her palms. Whispers hissed at the edge of her hearing, weak, useless, soft. She tasted blood where she had bitten her lip, and something in her, the old stubborn core that had carried her through hunger and loneliness, hardened like forged steel. When the first came again, she did not run. She stepped inside his reach, slammed the heel of her palm against his nose. Blood burst sudden and hot. He staggered, shocked. The second grabbed her arm, twisting. She wrenched free with a cry, drove her knee into his thigh. The yard erupted. Some laughed, some snarled, all astonished. Kaelin's voice cut through the noise. Enough! The warriors froze. Alara stood, heaving sweat dampening her borrowed gown, blood his, not hers, spattering her sleeve. Her heart thundered like a war drum. Kaelin descended into the pit. For a moment the crowd held its breath. He did not scold her. He did not call her fragile. He only touched her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze before all his people. "She bleeds as you bleed," he said, voice carrying across the yard. "She strikes as you strike. She endures." His eyes burned into hers. "And endurance is the marrow of strength." A murmur rolled through the pack, uncertain but undeniable. Vaynar's smile thinned to a blade's edge. Later, when the yard emptied and shadows stretched long across the stones, Kaelin found her alone. "You did not cower," he said quietly. "I will not give them the satisfaction," she answered, though her body trembled still. He studied her unreadable, then leaned close so near she felt the rough warmth of his breath. "Good, because the storm has only begun." The night after the trial in the yard brought no rest. Alara lay awake, every muscle sore, her mind replaying the clash again and again, the sting of fists, the taste of blood, the stunned silence when she refused to fall. She had expected bruises. She had not expected the echo of Kaelin's voice declaring her strength before all. It thrummed inside her chest like a second heartbeat. At dawn, Brenna entered with a tray. The old woman's expression was unreadable, but she set the food down and lingered. "You shook them yesterday. Not only the warriors. The servants whisper too. Some with hope, some with envy. That kind of stir draws eyes you may not want." Alara ate in silence, but each mouthful was ash. She knew Branna was right. She had stepped into a game of teeth and knives, and there was no stepping back. By mid-morning, summons came. She was led not to the yard or the great hall, but to the shrine within the fortress walls, a narrow place of carved stone incense smoke, clinging like old ghosts. Wolves had always honored the gods of war and storm gods who demanded scars as offerings. Alara felt out of place, her hands still smelling faintly of herbs and blood. Kaelin waited before the altar. His cloak laid aside his posture stripped of ceremony. The flame light carved harsh planes into his face. "You wonder why I called you here," he said without turning. "Yes," she admitted. He faced her, then eyes dark as riverstone. "Because Vaynar strikes with whispers. He poisons not the body, but the heart of the pack. He says you weaken me, that choosing you was folly. I will not fight him only with steel. I must show them why I chose you." Her throat tightened. "And why did you?" For a moment, silence. Then he stepped closer, so close she felt the weight of him, smelled the leather and smoke that clung to his skin. "Because you see what others do not. You see wounds where they see shame. You see futures where they see endings. That is rarer than any sword arm." His voice dropped. "And I have grown tired of ruling through fear alone." Her heart jolted at the nakedness in his words. Yet before she could speak, the doors creaked open. Vaynar entered with 2 priests at his side, faces stern as carved masks. Cousin Vaynar said smoothly, bowing just enough to mock, "We come to question. Your Omega healed a servant yesterday without sanction. Now she sheds blood in the yard, striking like a common fighter. What role does she claim, healer-warrior both? Or perhaps his smile curved a witch. The priests murmured agreement, their eyes cold on Alara. Kaelin's hand brushed hers unseen by the others, a silent promise. Then he spoke, each word clipped and dangerous. She is mine, my choice, my bond. And she is what I say she is. Vaynar's brows rose. Then let the gods decide. The priests moved forward, setting a shallow bronze bowl on the altar. Coals glowed within their smoke, curling. One gestured. If she is true, she will touch the flame and not falter. If false, the fire will consume her hand. The chamber stilled. Alara's pulse roared in her ears. Branna's warning echoed, healing called witchcraft here, yet retreat was impossible. Kaelin's gaze caught hers, fierce and steady. Endure, his eyes said. Alara stepped forward. The smoke stung her throat. She raised her hand, pale against the fire, and pressed her palm to the heat. Pain lanced up her arms, searing, unbearable, yet she bit down a cry, refusing to yield. The smell of scorched skin rose acrid and sharp. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the flames guttered, suddenly sinking low as though wind unseen had swept through. Gasps echoed. Alara staggered back. Her palm blistered but whole, the fire dimmed to embers. The priests muttered prayers, shaken. Even Vaynar's smile faltered. Kaelin seized the moment. His voice rang like a blade drawn clean. The gods themselves guard her. Doubt her again, and you doubt them. No one dared answer. Later, when the chamber emptied, Kaelin wrapped her burned hand in linen himself. His touch was careful, his eyes unreadable. You did not scream, he said. I will not give them reason to call me weak, she whispered. His mouth curved, not in mockery, but in something that made her chest ache. You are not weak. You are fire itself. Her pulse stumbled. And in that silence heavy and alive, Alara knew the path ahead was darker still, yet she was no longer walking it alone. The fortress could not hide its unrest. By the next night, murmurs rolled through the corridors like underground rivers. Servants paused when Alara passed, their gazes darting from her bandaged hand to her face, as if searching for proof of what they had seen in the shrine. Some whispered she had been chosen by fire. Others hissed that she was cursed, a danger cloaked in soft flesh. Branna said little, though her eyes lingered on Alara with something new, half respect, half warning. When the gods mark you, child men will claim the right to interpret their will. Be ready for both blessing and blade. The blade came sooner than Alara expected. That evening the great hall swelled with feasting. Kaelin sat at the high table, Alara at his side, her gown freshly brushed though plain compared to the finery of noblewomen who had once vied for his attention. Their laughter cut sharp as knives, their glances dismissive. Yet none dared voice insult with Kaelin's presence near. Vaynar rose part-way through the meal, goblet in hand, voice pitched to carry. Cousin, our pack has always been built on strength. Pain endured pain, given scars as proof of loyalty. But now we are told to look to a healer, a girl who douses fire with water. Tell me what happens when warriors grow soft, when wounds are mended too swiftly. Do we not risk losing the steel that made us feared? The hall hushed. Dozens of eyes fixed on Alara. She felt the weight of their judgment pressing her chest. Kaelin's voice was steady. A warrior who dies of fever cannot fight again. A warrior who rots from a cut never sees battle. Healing does not soften steel, it tempers it. A murmur spread uncertain. Some nodded, others frowned. Vaynar's smile was a slow, venomous curve. Then let us temper steel tonight. Let her prove that her gift can hold under true trial. I propose a test. He clapped his hands. 2 guards dragged forward a prisoner bloodied, barely conscious, his chest torn by jagged claws. The man's breath rattled shallow. Gasps rose. Elara recognized the colors on his shredded tunic, a rival pack's scout. Vaynar's eyes gleamed. Heal him, girl. Here before all. If your gift is real, show us. If not, let his blood judge you false. The hall erupted with shouts, some eager, some appalled. Kaelin's hand gripped the arm of his chair, tendons taut as rope. This is cruelty, Vaynar. He is enemy, not spectacle. Enemy or not, Vaynar said smoothly. His life is coin in your chosen's hand. Let the pack see whether she can pay. Every gaze turned to her. Elara's stomach churned, but she rose, moving to the prisoner. He lay gasping, eyes glazed with pain, his blood soaking the flagstones. She knelt, pressing her burned palm against his wound. Heat flared, not from the fire's trial, but from her own stubborn will. "Stay with me," she whispered, though she doubted he heard. She cleaned the gash with water from a goblet, tore linen into strips, and set her stitches by torchlight. Each movement felt exposed, raw, a dance before wolves who longed to see her stumble. Time slowed. Sweat beaded her brow. When at last she tied the final knot, the man still breathed ragged but steady. His eyes flickered open, glazed with shock. A stunned silence swept the hall. Then from the far end a voice cried, "She saved him!" Whispers surged like wildfire. Some spat curses an enemy kept alive, others muttered blessings. Kaelin rose, towering. "You demanded proof. You have it. She healed where any of you would have left him to rot." His voice cracked like thunder. "Mark this night well. Strength is not only the scar, but the hand that prevents it." Vaynar's smile did not falter, but his eyes burned with hatred. "We shall see how long softness lasts." Later, when the hall emptied and shadows claimed the corners, Elara sat trembling by the dying prisoner's side. Kaelin knelt before her, cupping her face in rough, calloused hands. "You stood before them all," he said softly, "even when they wished you broken." Her throat tightened. "I was afraid. So was I." His thumb brushed her cheek. "But I fear not your weakness. I fear the day you no longer stand beside me." The words sank deep a vow without being spoken. In his eyes she saw not only possession, but something rarer, faith. And she, despite the storm that loomed, felt the first fragile spark of belonging. The fortress air thickened in the days after the feast. Whispers followed Elara through every corridor, some voices awed, others venomous. She had saved a life where all expected death, and in doing so she had torn a crack through the old laws of the pack. In the kitchens, servants pressed their hands to her sleeve in gratitude. In the yard, warriors watched her with narrowed eyes as if her stitches had cut into their pride. Kaelin remained outwardly unshaken, but Elara felt the tension coiled beneath his silence. He drilled his men longer barked orders sharper, his presence like a storm barely leashed. At night, when he returned to the high chambers, His eyes softened only when they found her, as though she had become his one tether in a world of steel. But the storm broke sooner than either expected. It began with horns in the dark. Alara woke to their braying harsh and urgent. Torches flared beyond her window. She threw on her cloak and rushed into the corridor, where shouts thundered up the stairwells. "To arms! To arms!" Branna seized her arm. "Stay close, girl. Vaynar moves tonight." The words chilled Alara's blood. Together they hurried to the great hall where chaos seethed. Warriors clashed in the shadows, some bearing Kaelin's crest, others Vaynar's mark hastily stitched to their cloaks. Steel rang, screams echoed. The fortress had become a battlefield. Kaelin appeared through the smoke of torches, sword drawn, his cloak torn, his face grim. "Vaynar gathers traitors," he barked. "He would seize the throne while wolves sleep, but he will find we do not yield so easily." His gaze caught Alara. For a moment, the noise of battle fell away. "Stay where Branna places you. Do not stray." She nodded, though her heart railed against it. Already injured men stumbled into the hall, blood soaking their tunics. Without thinking, Alara fell to her knees beside one pressing cloth against a gash, whispering steadying words. More came groaning, bleeding eyes rolling. Soon a line of broken bodies stretched before her, as though the gods had demanded her gift be tested again and again. She worked until her fingers trembled, until her bandages ran out, until her own burned hand ached with every knot. But still she stitched and pressed and soothed, because to stop meant to let death claim them. Around her, servants began to assist, obeying her quick commands. Branna fetched water and herbs without complaint. For the first time, Alara felt herself not hidden, not scorned, but followed. Then the doors boomed open. Vaynar strode in, flanked by armored men, his smile wide as a wolf's maw. Blood spattered his furs. "Cousin," he called, voice thick with triumph. "You waste your strength. Even now half the pack swears to me. End this charade, yield the throne, and perhaps I will spare your healer's life." Kaelin stepped forward, blade dripping fury carved into every line of him. "You will not touch her." Vaynar's gaze slid to Alara, who knelt still among the wounded. His eyes gleamed with malice. "Ah, but she has already touched too many. See how they rally to her whispers. She steals loyalty from you, cousin, stitch by stitch." His words struck like knives, because in them rang a dangerous truth. The pack was watching not only Kaelin, but her. The hall tensed. One wrong move, and blood would drown the stones. Kaelin lifted his sword. Then, let it be decided now. Vaynar laughed, spreading his arms. "So be it." Steel met steel. The clash reverberated like thunder, drowning the cries of the wounded. Sparks showered as cousins turned to enemies, blades locking each strike heavy with years of bitterness. The pack circled, torn between fear and awe, the fate of High March balanced on the swing of swords. Alara pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She had stitched flesh, calmed fevers, endured fire, but this trial was beyond her reach. All she could do was watch, as Kaelin and Vaynar fought each blow, a promise that whichever man stood victorious would reshape her world. And deep within, where fear tangled with defiance, Alara made a silent vow. If Kaelin fell, she would not run. She would fight with whatever strength remained to keep the pack from falling into Vaynar's shadow. The storm had come, and she was no longer content to merely survive it. Steel shrieked against steel, echoing through the vaulted hall like the cries of hunted beasts. Kaelin and Vaynor moved with lethal grace, each strike a blur, each counter a test of will. Sparks sprayed across the flagstones, mingling with blood already spilled. Around them the pack shouted some crying. Kaelin's name, others Vaynor's, the fortress itself trembling beneath the weight of divided loyalties. Alara remained among the wounded hands, slick with blood that was not her own. Her heart pounded to the rhythm of the clashing swords. Every time Kaelin staggered, her chest clenched as if the blade had struck her. Yet still she worked, tying cloth-pressing wounds, whispering to warriors that life had not yet abandoned them. She would not let despair steal them away, not while her hands could resist it. The duel raged. Vaynor's strength was raw, brutal, his laughter sharp as fangs. Kaelin fought with precision, each strike deliberate, his fury channeled like a storm into a single blade. For long minutes, neither yielded until at last Vaynor fainted, slamming his shoulder into Kaelin's chest. The Alpha Lord crashed against the stone pillar, his sword flying from his grasp. A roar swept the hall. Vaynor's blade rose for the killing stroke. No, Alara cried, springing to her feet. For an instant all eyes turned. In that heartbeat Kaelin surged up, seizing Vaynor's wrist. The blade grazed his shoulder, spilling blood, but he twisted, forcing Vaynor down. They grappled, snarling like wolves stripped of pretense. Kaelin wrenched the dagger from his cousin's belt and drove it hard beneath Vaynor's ribs. Silence crashed over the hall. Vaynor's eyes widened, shock overtaking rage. He sagged against Kaelin's chest breath, gurgling before collapsing to the stones. Blood spread dark and fast. Kaelin stood swaying, chest heaving, his arm crimson where the sword had cut. He raised his head, meeting the gaze of every watching wolf. "The traitor falls," he thundered, "and any who still doubt stand forth and meet his fate beside him." No one moved. One by one, warriors lowered their weapons. The rebellion had broken. But Alara saw Kaelin's strength faltering. His skin was pale, his wound deep. When he turned toward her, his knees buckled. She darted to his side, catching him as best she could, her bandaged palm pressing hard against the gash. "Don't," he rasped, breath ragged. "Not before them. They will call it weakness." Her eyes burned. "Let them call it what they wish. I will not lose you." The hall watched as she tore strips of her gown, staunching the bleeding, whispering prayers older than the fortress walls. Her hands moved with desperate surety, stitching flesh, sealing life to life. Kaelin's breath steadied, though his face was tight with pain. At last, when the cloth was tied and the bleeding slowed, she lifted her head. The pack stared not with scorn, but with something harder to name. Fear, yes. Awe, perhaps, and beneath it, the first stirrings of reluctant respect. Kaelin's voice was hoarse but steady. "You see her?" he told them, leaning on Alara's shoulder, yet standing tall. "Not weakness, not curse. She is the fire that held me when death came. She is the hand that mends what war breaks. From this night she is mine, and no one will gainsay it." The hall shuddered with silence. Then slowly voices rose, first a murmur, then a chant. Kaelin's name mingled with hers. Alara felt heat flood her cheeks. She had not asked for power yet. It had found her. She met Kaelin's gaze, saw the raw trust there. and knew that whatever trials awaited, they would face them not as lord and captive, not as Alpha, and ignored Omega, but as two souls bound in storm and flame. And for the first time in a hall built on pain and blood, hope breathed like a living thing. Winter deepened across the high march. Frost crowned the ramparts, and wolves patrolled under breath that smoked in the moonlight. Yet within the fortress walls something had shifted. Where once the air had carried only the clang of steel and the scent of blood, now it bore quieter sounds. The laughter of servants, no longer silenced by fear. The low hum of wounded men, healed well enough to train again the murmured prayers of those who believed perhaps the god's fire had chosen more than cruelty. Elara walked the courtyards daily, her cloak brushing snow, her hands still raw from endless work. Children of the lower halls followed at her heels, clutching scraps of cloth, eager to carry water or herbs for her. Warriors still watched her with wariness, but some now inclined their heads in greeting, a gesture once unthinkable for an Omega girl who had arrived in borrowed silk and silence. Kaelin's recovery was slow, his wound deep, but each day he grew stronger. In the mornings he sparred with his captains, his movements measured but steady, and in the evenings he sat by Alara's side before the great hearth. He listened as she spoke of small things where the stone leaked cold, which servant's mother had fallen ill, how Lyda's stitched hand now held a bridle again. These details once beneath his notice, he began to weave into the fabric of his rule. "Your strength is not only yours now," he told her one night, his voice low as the fire crackled. "It spreads. They see it in you, and it forces them to reckon with what we might become." Elara looked at him, the scar across his shoulder gleaming pale, the shadows under his eyes, proof of battles fought and survived. "And what do you want us to become?" He did not answer at once. His hand covered hers, rough and warm. "Something no enemy would dare call weak. Something our children will not fear to inherit." In the weeks that followed, old customs bent, if not yet broken. Trials of pain were shortened, replaced by trials of endurance. Warriors who once scoffed at herbs now carried poultices in their belts. The pack learned slowly that healing did not unmake scars, it gave them meaning. But beneath the changes, danger still lingered. Loyalists to Vanar vanished into the forests, their oaths unbroken. At night, howls echoed from the hills, a reminder that peace was never absolute. Elara felt the weight of it in her bones. She knew shadows would return as they always did. Yet she also knew she was no longer the girl ignored at the ball. She was Kaelin's chosen, the healer who had stitched life into the heart of a pack raised on death. On the eve of the spring thaw, the hall filled once more. This time not for a feast of conquest, but for a vow. Kaelin stood before his people, Elara beside him. His voice carried like thunder through stone. "We are wolves of the high march. We are not only blades and scars. From this day, strength is the sword and the hand that steadies it. And as long as I draw breath, she—" He turned to Elara. His gaze fierce, unyielding, stands at my side as mate and equal. The hall erupted. Some cheered, some protested, but none could deny the decree. And in that storm of voices, Elara felt her own spirit rise. For the first time, she did not merely endure the gaze of the pack, she met it unflinching. Later, when the torches dimmed and only the hearth glowed, Kaelin drew her close. His lips brushed her temple, his words a vow meant only for her. "They may follow me, but I follow you." Without your hands, without your fire, I would have fallen. Whatever future comes, we shape it together. Alara closed her eyes against the steady beat of his heart, knowing the world beyond still bristled with enemies, knowing whispers would never cease. But within the fortress walls, hope had taken root, and hope once planted could grow even in the harshest winter.